Jake Morrison whistled off-key as he crawled through the twisted wreckage of what used to be a Kryllian battlecruiser. You know the type, guy who thinks duct tape fixes everything and considers a 20-foot drop into a pit of unknown alien machinery just another Tuesday. The kind of human who makes other species wonder if Earth's gravity is somehow different, because surely no sane creature develops this level of casual recklessness naturally. "Oh, this is nice," Jake muttered, prying loose a particularly shiny piece of tech that was probably worth more than his ship. Definitely not supposed to be glowing that color, but hey, glowing usually means expensive, right? What Jake didn't notice, because Jake never noticed these things, was the pair of obsidian eyes watching him from the shadows. 8 feet of pure nightmare had been stalking him for the better part of an hour, and Jake was about as aware of impending doom as a goldfish is of quantum physics. Meet Vex, a shadow maw, which sounds exactly as pleasant as you'd expect. Picture everything evolution designed to kill you, then give it opposable thumbs and a really bad attitude. Shadow maws were the kind of predator that made entire star systems install better locks and consider career changes. They hunted for sport, killed for art, and had a reputation for making grown Kryllian warriors cry for their mothers. Vex had been tracking this particular human for cycles, studying his patterns, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This was supposed to be simple. Humans were new to the galactic scene, soft little mammals who barely qualified as a spacefaring species. Easy prey. Except this human was doing everything wrong. First off, Jake had waltzed into a derelict ship that still had active defense systems, the kind that turned most salvagers into very expensive particle art. He disabled them by hitting random buttons and saying, "Nah, I think it goes like this instead," until the murderous laser grid gave up and went home. Then there was the way Jake moved through the ship. No checking corners, no scanning for threats, just humming what sounded like ancient Earth music, and occasionally stopping to eat something from a crinkly package. Vex had seen prey animals with better survival instincts. "Come on out, little guy," Jake called suddenly, and Vex's blood went cold. Had he been spotted? Impossible. He was a master of stealth, a shadow given form, death itself wrapped in... "I can hear you breathing back there," Jake continued, not even turning around. "Pretty loud breathing, too. You okay? Sounds like you might have a sinus thing going on." Vex emerged from his hiding spot, all 8 feet of claws and fangs and barely contained violence. His species had perfected the art of intimidation over millions of years. The sight of a shadow maw in hunting posture had caused entire civilizations to surrender preemptively. Jake looked up from his salvaging, blinked once, and said, "Oh, cool, you're one of those cat lizard things. I heard about you guys." He went back to his work. "Kind of smaller than I expected, but still pretty neat." Vex stood there, frozen in his intimidation pose, wondering if maybe he'd had a stroke. This was not how first contact with apex predators was supposed to go. Now, Vex had been hunting for roughly 3 centuries, which in Shadowmaw years is like being a really experienced accountant, except with more dismemberment. He had literally written the book on terror tactics. Well, okay, he'd carved it into the bones of his enemies, but the point stands. So naturally, he decided to show this ignorant human what a real predator looked like. Vex melted back into the shadows, becoming one with the darkness, a technique that had never failed to reduce his prey to quivering messes of existential dread. He began the traditional Shadowmaw hunt dance, a carefully choreographed series of movements designed to psychologically torment his victim before the kill. "Oh hey, you're doing that thing," Jake said without looking up. "The creepy movement thing. That's actually pretty cool. Are you, like, dancing? My neighbor's cat does something similar when it sees a laser pointer." Strike 1 for the psychological warfare approach. Vex tried a different tactic. He began making the hunting calls of his people, low-frequency growls that resonated in the bones and triggered the deep primal fear centers of most sentient brains. The sound had been known to cause entire armies to flee in terror. Jake paused in his salvaging and tilted his head. "Dude, you sound hungry. I've got some trail mix if you want." He tossed a small package toward Vex. "It's got nuts and dried fruit and some chocolate things. Probably won't kill you. I mean, chocolate kills dogs, but you don't really look like a dog, so we're probably good." The package bounced off Vex's snout. This was unprecedented. Vex had once made a Kryllian battle commander wet himself just by existing in the same star system. He'd caused 3 separate species to develop new phobias. The Galactic Council had literally created a new threat classification just for him. And this human was offering him snacks. Desperate now, Vex decided to demonstrate his hunting prowess. He launched himself at Jake with all the speed and grace of a nightmare given form. Claws extended, fangs bared, death incarnate descending from above. Jake sidestepped absently and caught Vex in what could generously be called a hug, but was more accurately described as the universe's most dangerous cuddle. "Whoa there, buddy," Jake said, steadying the thoroughly confused predator. "Almost tripped over that cable there. Good thing I caught you. Safety first and all that." Meanwhile, about 50 feet away, a group of Krillian scavengers had been watching this entire exchange through their ship's sensors. They were now in the process of what humans might call a complete mental breakdown. "Is that human wrestling a shadow maw?" whispered Krex, the team leader, his voice hitting octaves that shouldn't exist. "I think he's petting it," replied Blim, their sensor operator, who was seriously considering a career change. "Maybe accounting. Accounting was safe. Numbers didn't have claws." "Why isn't he dead?" asked Mort, the practical one of the group. "Shouldn't he be, extremely dead right now?" Back in the wreckage, Vex was having what humans might call an existential crisis, except with more fangs. Nothing in his 3 centuries of being the galaxy's most feared predator had prepared him for this. His prey was supposed to run screaming, not offer him dietary advice and express concern for his cardiovascular health. Now Jake wasn't completely oblivious to social cues. He could tell when someone was having a rough day, and this big cat lizard thing was definitely having a rough day. The poor guy looked like he just discovered his life savings had been invested in cryptocurrency right before a major crash. "You know what?" Jake said, settling down on a convenient piece of debris and patting the spot next to him. "Why don't we take a break? You look like you could use a breather, and I was about to have lunch anyway." Vex, operating on roughly 3 centuries of predatory instinct, sat down, then immediately realized what he'd done and tried to look menacing again, but it's hard to maintain your reputation as a galactic terror when you're sitting crisscross applesauce next to a human eating a sandwich. "I'm gonna call you Vex," Jake announced, taking a bite of what appeared to be peanut butter and something that might have been alien jelly. "You look like a Vex, all mysterious and angular and stuff." The fact that this was actually Vex's name was something he decided not to examine too closely, because that way lay madness, and possibly therapy. Jake offered half his sandwich. "Want some? I know you probably eat, raw meat and the screams of your enemies or whatever, but this is pretty good too, my mom's recipe." And here's where things got weird, even by the standards of a story where a human was having a picnic with death incarnate. Vex, who hadn't eaten anything that wasn't still twitching in about 50 years, found himself actually curious about this peanut butter. 20 minutes later, they were both sitting there, Jake explaining the finer points of Earth cuisine while Vex made small, confused noises around a mouthful of sandwich that was apparently better than the blood of his enemies. Who knew? This touching scene of interspecies friendship was interrupted by the sound of several Krillian scavengers having synchronized panic attacks over the communication system. "Morrison!" came a voice crackling through Jake's comm unit. "What in the 17 hells are you doing over there?" "Oh hey, Captain Zorb," Jake replied cheerfully. "Just having lunch with my new buddy Vex. He's pretty cool once you get to know him, kind of like a really big scary house cat." "Sure," said. There was a long pause. The kind of pause that suggests someone on the other end is questioning their life choices, their career decisions, and possibly the fundamental nature of reality itself. "Morrison," Captain Zorb said very carefully, "please tell me you did not just refer to a shadow maw as a house cat." "I mean, he does this cute thing where he tilts his head when he's confused," Jake continued, completely missing the note of barely contained hysteria in his captain's voice. "And look at this!" Jake held up his comm unit so Zorb could see Vex, who was indeed tilting his head in confusion while trying to figure out why peanut butter was so inexplicably delicious. The communication system went dead. In the distance, there was the sound of Captain Zorb explaining to his crew that their human salvage expert had apparently suffered a complete psychological break and was now having tea parties with the galaxy's most feared predator. Now, here's the thing about the galactic community that Jake never bothered to learn. Because Jake approached interstellar politics the same way he approached electrical safety, which is to say, not at all. The galaxy had a very sophisticated communication network, and news traveled fast. Really fast. Like faster than Jake could say, but he's actually pretty friendly once you get to know him. Fast. Within 6 standard hours, footage of Jake casually sharing lunch with a shadow maw had gone viral across 17 different species' social networks. The Krillian scavengers, bless their traumatized hearts, had been live-streaming their salvage operation when they captured what was now being called the incident. The video opened with standard salvage footage. Boring stuff, really. Until the camera panned to show Jake Morrison, human salvage operator, sitting cross-legged next to 8 feet of weaponized nightmare, both of them eating what appeared to be sandwiches. Vex was even making little sandwiches rumbling noises, which was somehow more terrifying than his usual death threats. The Galactic News Network's morning show was in complete chaos. Their lead anchor, a distinguished Zentorian named Quill Brightwing, had the look of someone whose worldview was crumbling in real time. "We're receiving reports," Quill said, his usually perfect composure cracking like old paint, "that a human has apparently domesticated a shadow maw. For our viewers just tuning in, this is roughly equivalent to someone announcing they've trained a black hole to fetch their newspaper." The network cut to their xenobiology expert, Dr. Kresh Mindflayer, whose 3 eyes were twitching independently, which in his species indicated severe psychological distress. "This is impossible," Dr. Mindflayer declared, his tentacles writhing with agitation. "Shadow maws don't domesticate. They don't form social bonds. They don't even acknowledge other life forms except as potential prey items. Yet here we have video evidence of one sharing food with a human. Sharing food, Quill." "Dr. Mindflayer," Quill said carefully, "in your professional opinion, what does this mean?" "It means," Dr. Mindflayer replied, his voice rising to near hysteria, "that either this shadow maw has suffered a complete species-wide genetic breakdown, or humans are so fundamentally terrifying that apex predators are trying to appease them by acting cute." Meanwhile, the Galactic Council was holding an emergency session. The chamber was filled with representatives from hundreds of species, all of them looking like they'd just been told that the laws of physics were more like guidelines, really. Ambassador Threx of the Kryllian Empire stood at the central podium, his usually pristine uniform wrinkled from stress-induced molting. "Esteemed colleagues," Threx began, "we face an unprecedented situation. Our intelligence suggests that humans may not be the harmless primitives we assumed. Any species capable of casually befriending a shadow maw must be considered a potential galactic threat. Or," interjected Ambassador Zilch of the Centaurian Collective, "they're too stupid to recognize danger when it has 8-inch claws and a taste for sentient flesh. Declared Ambassador Grox of the Hive Worlds, might actually be more terrifying." Back on the salvage ship, Jake was completely unaware that he'd accidentally triggered the first galactic crisis in 3 centuries. He was busy teaching Vex how to play poker, which was going about as well as you'd expect when one player has no concept of deception and the other keeps trying to eat the cards. "So the idea is to not let me know what cards you have," Jake explained patiently, "but also to convince me that you have better cards than you actually do." Vex tilted his head, a gesture that the galaxy now found absolutely terrifying in context. To Jake, it just looked thoughtful. "I do not understand," Vex rumbled, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "Why would I conceal my hunting advantages? This seems counterproductive to successful prey acquisition." "Well, it's not really about hunting," Jake said. "It's more like a game, you know, for fun." The concept of doing something for fun, without any survival or dominance purpose, was so alien to Vex that his brain briefly shut down and rebooted. When it came back online, he had somehow developed what humans might recognize as the early stages of a personality disorder. It was during their 3rd hand of poker, when Jake was explaining why a pair of 7s beat a single ace, that Vex finally had his moment of clarity. Not the peaceful, enlightened kind of clarity you read about in philosophy books, but more like the sudden, horrifying realization that you've been trying to intimidate Cthulhu. "Jake," Vex said slowly, his massive claws delicately holding playing cards that looked like postage stamps in his grip, "may I ask you something about human recreational activities?" "Sure thing, buddy," Jake replied, cheerfully reorganizing his hand. "Though I should warn you, I'm probably not the best example of normal human behavior. My mom always said I had a gift for finding trouble." "You mentioned that you enjoy something called bungee jumping," Vex continued carefully. "Could you explain this activity?" "Oh, yeah, that's great stuff," Jake said, his eyes lighting up. "You find a really tall bridge or cliff, tie an elastic rope around your ankles, and then jump off. The idea is that the rope stops you just before you hit the ground. Sometimes it works." Vex's 3-chambered heart skipped approximately 7 beats. "Sometimes?" "Well, you have to calculate the rope length right," Jake explained casually. "Get it wrong and you either get jerked back too early, which is boring, or you calculate too long and become a pancake, which is permanent." The galactic apex predator was beginning to understand that he might have made a serious miscalculation about the human food chain position. "And this is considered recreational?" Vex asked faintly. "All of the tamer extreme sports, really," Jake continued, completely oblivious to the fact that he was giving Vex what amounted to a horror movie synopsis. "Now, skydiving. That's where things get interesting. You jump out of a perfectly good aircraft with nothing but a fabric parachute between you and becoming street pizza. But why? Vex whispered, his voice carrying the same tone other species reserved for discussing cosmic horrors. For the rush, man, the adrenaline. Plus it's a great way to see the countryside. Jake paused thoughtfully. Actually, last time I went skydiving, my main chute didn't deploy, so I had to use the reserve. Good thing, too, because the reserve barely opened in time. Landed in someone's barbecue, which was awkward, but hey, free hamburgers. Vex was starting to understand why the humans seemed so remarkably unconcerned about his presence. This was a species that voluntarily threw themselves off cliffs for entertainment. What was one more predator in the grand scheme of things? Jake, Vex said very carefully, what do humans do when they encounter dangerous wildlife on your home planet? Depends on the animal, I guess, Jake replied, dealing another hand. Bears, you're supposed to make yourself look big and back away slowly. Sharks, you punch them in the nose. Snakes, well, depends if they're venomous or not. Venomous ones you avoid, non-venomous ones some people keep as pets. Pets, Vex repeated numbly. Oh yeah, humans love pets. Dogs, cats, birds, fish, reptiles. My buddy Rick had a pet alligator for a while. Beautiful animal, but it kept trying to eat the mailman, so he had to donate it to a zoo. The pieces were falling into place for Vex with all the subtlety of a collapsing star. Humans didn't just coexist with predators, they actively sought them out. They threw themselves into situations that would send most species running for their therapy sessions. They treated mortal danger like a weekend hobby. Jake, Vex said, his voice barely above a whisper, what is the most dangerous thing humans do for fun? Jake considered this seriously, tapping his cards against his chin. Probably war, if I'm being honest. We've gotten really good at it over the years. Started with sticks and rocks, worked our way up to nuclear weapons that can crack planets. Whole industries built around making better ways to eliminate each other. And you consider this recreational? Well, not exactly recreational, Jake clarified. More like competitive problem solving with extremely permanent consequences. Although some people do paint their faces and reenact old battles on weekends, so maybe it is recreational for some folks. Vex sat there in stunned silence, finally understanding his position in this cosmic comedy. He hadn't been hunting a prey animal at all. He'd been trying to intimidate a member of a species so casually violent that they had weaponized entertainment and turned survival into a sporting event. The realization hit him like a freight train made of existential dread. Humans weren't just apex predators. They were apex predators who had gotten so good at being apex predators that they had to invent increasingly creative ways to put themselves in mortal danger, just to feel alive. And here he was, a creature designed by evolution to be the perfect killer, sitting cross-legged on a spaceship floor learning card games from a being whose species had apparently looked at the concept of natural selection and said, "Hold my beer." Jake, Vex said finally, his voice carrying a new note of what might have been respect, or terror, or possibly both. I believe I understand now why you were not afraid of me. Afraid? Jake looked genuinely confused. Dude, why would I be afraid? You're just a big space cat with attachment issues. Besides, you seem pretty friendly once you get past all the posturing and death glares. 3 standard months later, the galaxy had developed what could charitably be called an adjustment disorder. The Galactic News Network had created an entirely new category of programming called Human Watch, which was basically 24-hour coverage of whatever inexplicably terrifying thing humans were doing this week. Jake and Vex had become something of a celebrity duo, though Jake remained blissfully unaware of this fact because he never watched the news. Too depressing, he'd explained to Vex, who was beginning to understand that human logic operated on principles that defied several fundamental laws of physics. Their salvage operations had become remarkably efficient, mainly because other salvage crews now fled whenever they detected Vex's presence. This gave Jake and Vex first pick of all the best derelicts, which Jake attributed to really good luck, and Vex attributed to the universe finally making sense. Hey Vex, Jake called from inside the twisted remains of what used to be a Centauri luxury liner. Come check this out. I think I found the entertainment center. Vex bounded over with an enthusiasm that would have caused mass evacuations 6 months ago, but now just made Jake grin. The former apex predator had developed several distinctly unpredator-like habits, including an addiction to human snack foods and a tendency to purr when Jake scratched behind his auditory receptors. What did you find? Vex asked, his massive form somehow managing to look curious rather than menacing. Looks like they had a gaming system, Jake replied, holding up a device that was probably worth more than most planets. Want to see if we can get it working? I bet I can teach you Space Mario Kart. Before Vex could respond, their conversation was interrupted by a series of small chirping sounds coming from the ship's entrance. Jake looked up to see what appeared to be a pack of juvenile razor wolves, each about the size of a small hovercar and covered in spines that could cut through titanium. Normal people, and by normal people we mean literally every other sentient species in the galaxy, would have immediately begun planning their funerals. Jake just sighed. "Oh great, more strays," he muttered, walking toward the pack of Galaxy-class predators like he was approaching a litter of lost puppies. "Hey there, little guys. You lost?" The razor wolves, who had been expecting to find easy prey, instead found themselves being addressed in the same tone of voice most people reserved for cooing at babies. Their pack leader, a particularly large specimen named Nash, tilted his head in the universal expression of, "What the hell is happening right now?" "They appear to be juveniles," Vex observed, following Jake with the casual air of someone who had completely given up trying to understand the universe. "Probably separated from their pack." "Poor little things," Jake said, completely ignoring the fact that these little things could disembowel a battlecruiser. "They must be starving." He pulled out a package of trail mix and started distributing it to creatures that normally fed exclusively on the terror and flesh of their enemies. Within 10 minutes, Jake had a pack of 6 juvenile razor wolves following him around like imprinted ducklings, chirping contentedly while they munched on nuts and dried fruit. "This is becoming a pattern," Vex noted, watching Jake explain to the razor wolves why they shouldn't chew on the ship's wiring. "What's becoming a pattern?" Jake asked absently, now somehow involved in what appeared to be a belly rub session with creatures that could slice through starship hulls. "Predatory species attempting to hunt you, then becoming domesticated," Vex explained carefully. "Domesticated seems like a strong word," Jake replied. "I prefer friendship inclined." The news of Jake's latest adoption project spread through the galactic community with the speed and impact of a supernova. Emergency sessions were called, military advisors consulted, and several species began seriously considering preemptive surrender to humanity, based purely on the precautionary principle. The Galactic Council had by now created an entirely new department called Human Compatibility Assessment, which was staffed by their best xenobiologists, military strategists, and a surprisingly large number of therapists. Ambassador Threx had developed what his species' medical professionals were calling Morrison syndrome, a condition characterized by spontaneous molting whenever the human's name was mentioned in official proceedings. "The situation has escalated beyond our worst projections," Threx reported to the emergency assembly, his voice slightly muffled by the breathing apparatus he now required during human discussions. "Intelligence reports indicate that the human designated Jake Morrison has now attracted a pack of razor wolves. They appear to be playing fetch." The assembly hall fell silent except for the sound of several delegates quietly updating their wills. Meanwhile, Jake was teaching his new pack basic ship maintenance, which mostly involved explaining why they shouldn't eat the important cables, while Vex served as translator and occasional disciplinarian. "I don't understand why everyone gets so worked up about this stuff," Jake said to Vex, as they watched the razor wolf pups attempt to organize themselves into a pyramid formation for reasons known only to themselves. "They're just animals. Sure, they're big animals with lots of sharp bits, but so are grizzly bears, and humans figured out how to deal with those centuries ago." "Jake," Vex said carefully, "how did humans deal with grizzly bears?" "Well, first we tried to kill them all," Jake replied cheerfully, "but then we realized that was probably morally questionable, and also bad for the ecosystem, so now we mostly just avoid them and take pictures from a safe distance. Some people still hunt them, but mostly for population control purposes." Vex made a mental note to never ask Jake about human conservation efforts again. The Galactic Council's final decision was announced 3 weeks later. After extensive debate, analysis of 17 different psychological profiles, and consultation with every military strategist in known space, they reached a unanimous conclusion. Humanity would be officially classified as apex adoption specialists, and granted full diplomatic immunity for all future incidents involving the spontaneous domestication of galactic predators. It was, the Council noted, significantly safer than trying to stop them. Jake learned about this decision the same way he learned about most galactic politics, which is to say, he didn't. He was too busy teaching his growing collection of rescued apex predators how to play poker, a decision that would have horrifying implications for the galactic economy once they figured out how to apply their hunting instincts to competitive gambling. But that, as they say, is another story entirely.